This video is brought to you by our new Patreon campaign. Please go support us. You explore an ancient temple and discover a golden Cthulhu totem. Upon grasping it, you switch bodies with Cthulhu's earthly servant, Guillermo del Toro. Firstly, you should know he'll be making out with your girlfriend. Secondly, you have to make his next movie, or your next movie. Now, don't freak out, we here at the Film Guy channel have got you covered, with some tips and tricks to help you more confidently make your Guillermo del Toro movie. Spoilers, obviously. As with any director, it's important to start off with their influences, like director James Whale's Frankenstein. This film had a huge influence on Del Toro, in his mind showing him that even with heavy makeup and prosthetics, an actor can turn in a stellar performance. Next, check out Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. This film taught Del Toro the power of choice and using family dynamics in storytelling and how that can play out in a thriller's environment. Next, check out anything from Terence Fisher. His films taught Del Toro to keep control of his camera movements at the peak of his horror, as other directors often tend to let the camera go crazy during these moments. And lastly, Guillermo's favourite storyteller, the director Ingmar Bergman. Mostly known for his introspective dramas, he actually started off doing quite light-hearted films. That being said, the most common strain among these artists is their works with monsters, dark themes, and horror. It's the inspiration of all of this together that has inspired his visual style and writing. Obviously, this isn't everything, but it's a great place to start. So this is important. Almost all of Del Toro's protagonists' character arcs are defined by their ability to make a choice. The choice to deal with our own mistakes or to let others suffer for them, to fit into what is expected or to stand out and live differently. The choice to conquer our demons or let others suffer from their effects. To put aside your vengeance and mistrust for the greater good. To kill or not to kill. In Guillermo's mind, choice is what separates his protagonists and his antagonists, as his villains are never shown to have to choose to continue in their actions. This is likely why people often suggest that a lot of his villains, although charismatic, are very one-note and or weakly written. Speaking of the protagonist, there are a couple of commonalities that show up among them that should be noted. Firstly, a lot of them are orphans. This can happen in or be set before the film. Secondly, we often see the person the main character loves the most die or dying, which is often the or in addition to the parent. Thirdly, they often have a power or ability that most others in the film's universe don't have or are not capable of. Most commonly, this is the ability to see spirits and or into another world, but we also see superhuman strength and agility. These films ask you to believe in magical and fantastical worlds, but unlike films like Harry Potter, where the magic is what makes it special, Del Toro's films treat the fantastical as the mundane. In The Devil's Backbone, our first ghost sighting is during the day, and it's purposely shot and edited to not be scary. In Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia's first magical encounter is with a fairy, and the scene plays out almost as if she was expecting it to happen. And we start Pacific Rim years after humanity first encountered the kaiju. Now battling them is treated in the tone of a sports league. The reason for this is when it comes to otherworldly premise storytelling, you usually have to give a lot of rule-setting exposition for audiences to buy into the premise. But when the magic isn't treated as overly special and doesn't have a huge effect or impact on the daily life of the characters, although hard to pull off, you don't have to give a lot of exposition as it's just a world they live in, not their way of life, thus allowing the storytelling to be less restricted. One of Guillermo's strongest abilities is his world and set creation. His films are constantly gorgeous to look at and are often described as pure eye candy. Although Del Toro himself hates this term. He prefers the term eye protein, as candy goes to waste and fattens you up, but protein builds you up. It's the difference in designing something to look cool and designing it to tell you something about the character. A great example of this is Carmen's prosthetic leg in The Devil's Backbone. From a distance, it looks plain and somewhat weathered, but take a closer look and you can see it is beautifully crafted, made of smooth, rich wood with a silver foot. It even has a hidden compartment. This leg is a physical representation of Carmen as a character, a woman who from a distance looks plain, but take a closer look and although weathered, she is quite beautiful and shows signs of former wealth, who perhaps is also holding on to a few secrets of her own. It is this level of thought and detail that Guillermo puts into all of his design work. So next time you watch one of his movies, take a look at the small details, because they are likely there on purpose. He is a big believer of encouraging the set to be a character unto itself. This is achieved by building at least one big statement piece onto every set or shooting location. This can be as simple as large pipes on a wall, the arcs of a doorway, the support beams in a room, a spiral staircase in the background of a shot, or even something a bit more noticeable like a hole in the roof. It's his way of trying to connect story moments with locations. Whether it works or not is up to the audience, but you can't argue it doesn't lead to some very beautiful environments. Guillermo also often uses colour to help tell his story. He bathes the set in his typical yellow, blue and green colour tones, which will often change dramatically per sequence. For example, let's look at Pan's Labyrinth, a film that is a magical fairy tale set in the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War. There are two main colour palettes used in this film to help tell the story. For the most part, we start to see them take effect after Ophelia has started her magical trials. Firstly, deep blue tones for the antagonist's storyline involving fascism during wartime, and golden yellows for Ophelia's adventures with the magical world and also its effect on the real world, being mostly in support of the rebels' victories. Although a yellow and blue colour palette is not unique to him, when both storylines start to converge and affect each other, the difference between the colour palettes start to become more noticeable between rooms. This is showing the battle between the two worlds. Settings that were at one point coloured one way in a previous scene are now coloured the opposite way, as they have been affected by the actions of the fascists or by the magic. It's worth mentioning that although Guillermo's execution of this was not perfectly done, the reason he attempted this was to subconsciously show the difference of intention between both storylines, and the effect Ophelia's story has on the world. Although this control of colour is most noticeable in Pan's Labyrinth, you can find less obvious examples of this in most of Del Toro's work, where lighting will dramatically change from environment to environment, often in the same scene to coincide with a character's journey or spiritual direction. An important note is that Del Toro despises the need for perfect logic in films. His belief is that the strongest storytelling comes from a place of mystery and awe, and not everything having to make perfect sense. In a summarization of his own words when he was arguing with Warner Brothers about one of his scripts, he basically said if the Roadrunner cartoon was being made today, people would criticize it because clearly the coyote is making poor investments and logically would give up and use his money to buy food instead of wasting it. Studios think the audiences need to be able to rationally explain every little detail of the story to lose themselves in it. Guillermo completely disagrees, especially considering he thinks almost all of his films are dark fairy tales, therefore not to be taken overly seriously, but unfortunately Western audiences often do, as he is often criticized for not being able to get great performances from his actors. A possible reason is he is an extremely visual storyteller. This means showing instead of telling. In his own words, he would rather show a couple embrace after a fight than have a 10-minute dialogue scene of a couple explaining their feelings to each other in a coffee shop. This could mean the issue of mediocre performances has more to do with the scripts he writes for his actors, not giving them much of an opportunity to shine. I personally believe you need to have a strong flair for both visual and audible storytelling to be a great director, and Del Toro leaning on his competent visual style has stopped a lot of his films from achieving greatness. But more often than not, when he leans on his world creation abilities, his films get closer to achieving it. Anyway, here are a few Del Toro-isms you will find commonly occur in his movies. Religious symbolism, scenes taking place at night, scenes taking place underground, heavy rain, orphans, clockwork, children dying, creepy stuff in glass containers, the camera always moving and rarely stopping, and lastly, creatures and monsters. Speaking of which, a common theme among his characters is that people are monsters, and monsters are often people, meaning that with some exception, the stereotypical monster of the story usually turns out to have a heart of gold or a strong ethical standing, and the villain or antagonist often turns out to be a human taking advantage of the characters locked into the situation of the story. While keeping that in your mind, Guillermo has said growing up being bullied, beaten up and outcasted because of his size and appearance, he would relate more to his favourite movie monsters than he would the people in those films. This is a perspective that sees them as misunderstood creatures and not necessarily stereotypical monsters. Perhaps his own films are an ambassador for the monsters, encouraging us to see the loneliness, brokenness and the desire to be accepted, asking us to choose to see the person inside the monster that we have made an outcast. With all that being said, there is no denying he is one of the most creative directors working today. He has created great films with very powerful moments, combining his world building with purposeful and personal messages told to us in incredibly beautiful and inspired ways. And if you make the effort to do the same, you will be on your way to making your Guillermo del Toro movie. Probably. Anyways guys, this has been Drew reading on behalf of The Film Guy. Please go check out his Patreon campaign, and if you are new to the channel, then please hit that subscribe button and also the alert button. You can follow the main man on Twitter at The Real Film Guy, or if you like my voice, follow me at TES Drew. See you soon.